Hi, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to Some Soothings. This is season 2, episode 9. My name is Joshua. I'm a musician and glitch and sound artist. And Some Soothings is a 30-minute weekly live stream in which I'll share and discuss art and poetry and music and history. There'll be some jokes, there'll be some earnestness, there'll be some live improvised music. I think of this as a kind of place to work out ideas aloud, and hopefully somehow, through the pixels, connect a little bit with folks out there in the world. We'll endeavor to be really peaceful, really vulnerable, calming, but we're taking a broad definition of the word soothing, and we will not ignore any of the very real seriousnesses of our contemporary moment. So, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. Some quick housekeeping. We're archiving these episodes on IGTV, so that's like the TV with a lightning bolt in my profile. So if you want to see any past episodes, and then I'll try to get this show up as quickly as I can this evening in case the stream gets weird or something. If you want to learn more about anything that we talk about on the show, there's an info doc that's pinned in the pinned comment down below. I can't really clock the comments as we're going, but I am doing this screen record thing so I can check them out later on. So I will read them, later on this evening when I'm drinking my nightly glass of actual blood, and I'll respond to any questions or comments at the top of next week's show. Note, next week is our season finale. We did it again. We've done two of these. This is the second time we've done it. So next week, season finale, and then we're going to take a little break, mostly just to focus on our crippling election season anxiety. And then after that sorts itself out, hopefully it sorts itself out, we'll be back in mid-late November, and then we'll do a bridge, mini season between the election and the holidays. So anyway, please do tune in next week for the close of season 2. We'd love to have you there. And of course, thanks for hanging with us tonight. Let's get the show going. Let's look at some art. So tonight we are looking at Michael Rakowitz's ongoing series of work entitled The Invisible Enemy Should Not Exist. This series began in 2007 and continues through the present. Rakowitz was born in 1973 on Long Island and currently lives in Chicago and teaches at Northwestern University. Rakowitz trained at SUNY Purchase College and at MIT, and has shown work all over the place: MoMA, Mass MoCA, PS1, Tate Modern, Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto. I saw an iteration of this work at the MCA in Chicago and also at the Jane Lombard Gallery here in Chelsea just this past January. In 2019, Rakowitz was slated to have work shown in the Whitney Biennial, but declined to participate in protest to protest a member of the Whitney's board, who is this billionaire philanthropist whose wealth was derived in part from manufacturing body armor and tear gas for law enforcement and military. And so, Rakowitz was invited. The biennial is by invitation only, and so the curators invited Rakowitz, and he declined to participate. That led to kind of a series of protests, other artists withdrawing from the show. The board member eventually resigned, and all indications are that they were forced out. But that person even eventually divested from their arms manufacturing company. So, I don't know, that's cool, that's really powerful, convictions and affecting change. There's a decent New York Times summary of kind of that whole saga in our info doc, so I totally encourage you to check that out. And that kind of action is just very Michael Rakowitz. He's this conceptual artist and sculptor whose work is deeply committed to social justice and peacemaking, cultural preservation. And the work is often informed by his Iraqi Jewish heritage and his family's exile from Iraq. There's a kind of just really profound thoughtfulness that's evidenced across the span of his work. I find it all just really moving and really potent. I encourage you to click around on his website and explore the range of his stuff. Just a really brief, quick example. his Enemy Kitchen social practice series. He engages high school students and teaches them how to cook like a traditional dish of a place that the U.S. is embargoing or at war with, which I feel like is so smart. I kind of get the chills, like I want to weep a little just thinking about it, like these kids and this artist like making Afghani food or Iraqi food. It's just really humane and just really wise. Okay, so let's talk about this work that we're seeing here. So this is The Invisible Enemy Should Not Exist, and so it's an ongoing series. These are sculptural installations in which Rakowitz recreates ancient Middle Eastern sculpture that had previously been housed at the Iraqi National Museum that has since been looted or destroyed in the wake of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. So these recreations are based on photographs, museum blueprints, and where possible, on-site measurements. Rakowitz painstakingly researches the lost artifacts, really striving for accuracy. But then, and you may have noticed this, he creates the work from this like really kind of mundane found material, these like newspaper clippings or flyers or just like cut paper and food packaging. I should have mentioned this earlier. His training, he's a stone carver. His initial training is a stone carver. So dude is a trained stone carver, but chooses to work in like paper mache to do this stuff. His reasoning for it is so smart and so lovely. He says, quote, "If these come back as ghosts, they should wear the skin of a provenance that is more confusing." Which I feel is just like, it's just really smart. These priceless and wildly ancient holy objects, Rakowitz then like recreates in kind of cast-off ephemera. Regular viewers of the show will recognize that this work is kind of a real like natural extension of this conversation we've been having for much of the second half of the season about artifact and fiction and imagination, and specifically about the erasure and destruction of traditional objects, histories, and wisdoms at the hand of violence, racism, oppression, and colonization. And I feel like this work really like exemplifies those ideas and concerns. Rakowitz even replicates the layout of the original rooms in the museum, including like wall text, museum labels, and signage. So like it's not just reappearing the work, but it's also reappearing the context in which a museum goer would experience the work. So it's this like multi-layer of simulacra. And I think like because of that, because it's presented in like as like in like this museological, in this museum like context, but it's these like really vulnerable, these paper, like these faux conservations. It's impossible not to like think on the fate of the original work. These are surrogates, they're evocations, they are like weird remembrances, they're elegy, they're a testament to that loss, to that loss of culture and loss of wisdom and loss of history. And this work operates like a scar. Its presence evidences violence and reminds us of the wound. And so there's all these layers of like memorial and monument in the work, and all of this coming from this artist who, because of war and visa and embargoes and geopolitics, has yet to visit his homeland. Rakowitz has never been to Iraq. So that's our bit. Michael Rakowitz, radical humanitarian, conceptual sculptor, generous mind, generous heart. Definitely thumb through our info doc for more info on his work. There's a lot to learn and love here. The New Yorker profile is really delightful, and thumbing through his website. This is just really like potent and mindful, just like heart stuff. It's really strong. So All right, up next we have a new segment on our show called Ask Yourself. A few weeks ago I wrote up a bunch of, sort of like provocative and maybe combative questions. And I made this like little piece of code, this software that like randomizes them. And so I'll push the button. I don't know what question I'm going to get. And then I'll endeavor to answer that question with as much truthfulness as I can muster. And maybe it can serve as a prompt for you as well. So let's see what we get. All right. Mean. Okay, let's do it. Hey, Buster. What have you lied about recently? Oh, my dude. I think that you thought that you were going to really stick it to me with this one. But in fact, my most recent lie was to protect a coworker. To make sure a coworker didn't get busted for something they messed up. So yeah, I was approached about this issue and I was able to kind of dissemble and obscure the truth. But then when it came down to it, I actually ended up having to totally lie to kind of protect this coworker from getting busted. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I have, we, as you know, have a general don't narc ever policy, basically. And so, yeah, didn't narc on this cat. So that was my most recent lie. But since we're actually the same person, just having a conversation where I flip the camera back and forth, I recall the context of us writing this question, and so I think maybe in that spirit of maybe being more vulnerable, I'll try to answer it with that in mind. So I think one way that I think that we all do this, we sort of obscure our well-being to people that care about us. So for example, throughout this pandemic, we have been doing fine, and we've been telling people that inquire how we're doing that we've been doing fine, that we're managing, that we're hanging in, that it's hard sometimes, but we're making it work. And of course all this is true, but I think in some ways it sands down some of the spikes or diminishes some of the gravity or seriousnesses of some of the emotions that we have been having and have. There's totally days that are joyful and easy, I guess. But then there's also days that we feel profoundly lonely and angry and overwhelmed and overtired. And so on balance, it's true when we say we're doing fine, but I think in some ways sanding down those spikes is a disservice to the reality of those emotions, and maybe a disservice to our loved ones. So that's something to think about. That's a lie. I don't know if it's a lie exactly, but it's a kind of obscuring of the truth that maybe needs a little investigation. So there you go. What have we lied about? What is it? Oh, I have to flip it back. I can't flip it back. So we lied to protect a coworker, and we lied about how we're doing, one of which we will work on, the other of which we will not. Okay. Boy, that's a segment. We'll see if that segment gets into season 3. Okay, what do we got next? Radical History Snacks. We feature cool old food, or we highlight a moment in the people's history. Today we're talking about the Children's Crusade of 1963. So in 1963, the Civil Rights Movement had pinpointed Birmingham, Alabama as one of the most segregated and actively institutionally racist big cities in the American South. For example, in 1962, there were 60 unsolved bombings and arsons of black businesses, homes, and churches in Birmingham. Unsolved, of course, because the cops were like not actually trying to solve them. It's speculated that at that time, 1/3 to 1/2 of the Birmingham police force were active KKK members. So, in early 1963, movement leaders initiated a campaign in Birmingham. In early 1963, Martin Luther King in Birmingham was arrested during a nonviolent civil disobedient protest. And during that imprisonment, he writes his very famous letter from a Birmingham city jail, which includes this like lovely and kind of foundational declaration of his ethic and tactic, which is, quote, "One has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws." Which, he's right. While King is in jail, another organizer, James Bevel, begins planning an action involving local students, local black students from Birmingham elementary schools and high schools, as well as nearby Miles College. So Bevel meets with student organizers, helps build like student networks, holds civil disobedience trainings, and prepares these young people for their inevitable arrest. And that's such an important point. So the city of Birmingham had declared that marches, sit-ins, and demonstrations in direct conflict with the U.S. Constitution declared them illegal and arrestable. So everyone involved in the Birmingham campaign knew they were going to be arrested. And my understanding is that was part of the point, right? So the strategy was to overwhelm the penal system, the local penal system, in hopes of like raising national awareness of the problems within it and of like the broader problems of segregation and violent racism in the city. So at exactly 11 a.m. on May 2nd, 1963, students begin leaving their classrooms. At first it's a trickle, then it's a flood. I mean, these are kids, elementary school kids, middle school kids, high school kids. Hundreds participate in this massive walkout. Gwen Sanders, who was a 7th grader at the time, tells about how her teacher turned her back as like a kind of tacit permission and like letting the kids know that they would not be reported for leaving. And then when the teacher turned around, there were only like 2 kids left in the classroom. Gwen Sanders has this amazing quote. She says, quote, "A lot of people worried that the kids were going to get hurt, but the reality of it is that we were born black in Alabama. We were going to get hurt if we didn't do something." End quote. So students from all over Birmingham come downtown to the 16th Street Baptist Church, walking miles to get there in some cases. They gather inside singing hymns and protest songs, and it's celebratory. There's like this joyous sense of resistance and community. So organizers, I think smartly, had communicated with the authorities and the press that there was going to be this children's march, which I think in many ways like put some real pressure on the city's no demonstration law. Like arresting kids is just it's a bad look. But even the organizers were just like totally stunned by the turnout, and they used like the new scale really strategically. So here's how they played this out. So about 50 students left the church and began marching towards City Hall, Birmingham City Hall, singing, chanting, dancing, but a wall of heavily armed cops barred their way. Students had poise and joy and training and righteousness on their side, and so they bravely, and again these are kids walking up to a wall of heavily armed cops, they bravely marched like right up to the line and submitted to be arrested. As the last student is getting loaded into a police wagon and the cops are laughing about an easy day's work, organizers send the next 50 kids. And then another, timing it so that it feels like each group is the last. But in fact, like while kids are trickling out the front of the church, hundreds more are arriving from farther afield, coming in through the back door. So this goes on all day. So the cops are bringing in buses to transport kids. They're calling in other cops from nearby townships to come help. But the kids just like keep coming, 50 at a time, singing "We Shall Overcome." They're chanting "Freedom, freedom" all day until over 900 kids are arrested. The youngest on record is an 8-year-old. So actions in Birmingham continue that week, and it gets more complicated. It gets more grim, and increasingly violent behavior from the cops, including the use of fire hoses and attack dogs. I I had seen, and I think you likely have probably seen those images before of the fire hoses and attack dogs in Birmingham, but I didn't know that those were middle school and high school kids. And nor did I know like the larger context of the action the day before. Just how profound it is that like in the face of that violence, like the kids totally remain peaceful and just like super brave. So the action hits the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and it directly leads to President John F. Kennedy proposing the Civil Rights Act the following month in June of 1963. Sadly, the legislation is not passed until July of the following year, after Kennedy is assassinated. So that's our snack. Kids, Birmingham, disobeying unjust laws. If you have the time, I linked to a 40-minute documentary film in the info doc, and it's really inspiring and just a pleasure to watch. So definitely check that out. And there's a little bit more info about the Children's Crusade from some other sources in our doc too. Okay, so up next we have our Some Soothings special feature. This week's special features the music of John Cage. This is his Sonata No. 1 for prepared piano, and our special this week is entitled Avant Guardrails. Oh boy. Each week on Some Soothings, we take a brief look at organizations or an organizer that's doing work that we admire. I will have researched and previously donated to the org, and in sharing it with you all, I'm encouraging you to consider a donation if you're able. So, this week we are looking at the org Critical Resistance. So this summer it's been super inspiring to me to see a phrase like defund the police or abolish the police, defund the police, like so readily on the lips of folks protesting and engaged in the protest movement, but also like farther afield, like on TV news and such. So Critical Resistance has been doing that kind of work for over 20 years. The org specifically says, quote, "In all our work we aim to make abolition common sense," end quote. Which I think is so critical. Our budgets reflect our priorities, and our priorities reflect our morals. I don't believe that the way to a safer world is through increasingly militarized and expensive policing. It feels like common sense to me that giving violent tools to individuals trained solely to enact violence would increase violence. That money could be spent creating resources, distributing food, teaching folk, making beauty, providing housing, mental health resources. But importantly, because most of our states require a balanced budget, that means we have a finite amount of money to work with that's in play there. So defund the police in some ways is like a sort of kind of in the weeds policy statement. Let's take this money from a failing line item and put it over here where it might do some good. So that's the kind of the premise behind this defund the police stuff. Let's get back to Critical Resistance and their role in this. In their own words, quote, "Critical Resistance is a member-led and member-run grassroots movement that seeks to end the prison industrial complex by challenging the belief that caging and controlling people makes us safe. We believe that basic necessities such as food, shelter, and freedom are what really make our communities secure. As such, our work is part of global struggles against inequality and powerlessness. Critical Resistance vision is the creation of genuinely healthy, stable communities that respond to harm without relying on imprisonment and punishment. We work to prevent people from being arrested or locked up in prison. In all of our work, we organize to build power and to stop the devastation that reliance on imprisonment and policing has brought to ourselves, our families, and our communities. So this is, I think, really vital work. These folks have been at it for like over 20 years, so if you're able to consider a donation, the donation link is in the pinned comment. Okay, what do we got? Let's play some music. Boy, I just am talking up a storm tonight, huh? I guess we'll just do like 2 or 3 minutes of some quick improvised electronic music. So here we go, let's do it. Phew, okay. Thanks for listening. Let's close with a poem. This is Preface to a 20-volume suicide note by Amiri Baraka. It's written on the occasion of his daughter's birth, so it's for Kelly Jones, born 16th May 1959. Lately I've become accustomed to the way the ground opens up and envelops me each time I go out to walk the dog. Or the broad-edged, silly music the wind makes when I run for a bus. Things have come to that. And now, each night, I count the stars. Each night I get the same number. And when they will not come out to be counted, I count the holes they leave. Nobody sings anymore. And then last night, I tiptoed up to my daughter's room and heard her talking to someone. When I opened the door, there was no one there. Only she, on her knees, peeking into her own clasped hands. All right, friends. Thank you for tuning in. See you back here next week for our season finale. Take really good care of yourselves. Take really good care of each other. Good night.